Marble It Up speedruns are packed with many tricks and shortcuts. Every level has a history, and together they tell the story of a dedicated community intent on pushing the limits of this simple marble game. I'm H-Dude, and in honor of the game's 3rd anniversary, I've chosen 10 of my favorite skips in Marble It Up Classic. Let's take a look at the history and progression of the game's most iconic shortcuts. As the only skip to make this list, which was expressly intended by the level's designer, Elevator Action's geometry and gem placement were meticulously designed to make a fun and challenging shortcut possible. Without it, this level is all elevator and no action, riding these slow-moving platforms across the gap and up the other side. A faster route was quickly discovered by players on release day, and it proved to be one of the most difficult tricks in the game, at least among those that were known at the time. Oddly enough, I was the first player to land a shortcut in this run on launch day, September 29th, 2018, using both quarter pipes to build enough speed and height to transfer the chasm. After collecting all 4 gems, the goal was reached with a time of 25.40. It was quickly beaten by DK Man a few minutes later with a 20.75. DK switched the order of the final 2 gems, establishing the route we use today, which saves up to 22 seconds, and setting the groundwork for future optimizations. And boy was it optimized. Like other early shortcut finders, DK's extensive experience with games like Marble Blast was key to discovering and executing the trick. DK would prove to be one of the most prolific speedrun innovators in the early days of Marble It Up. For such a technical level, the only way to make it fast was to cut every corner and graze every gem hitbox. Tweaks to the shortcuts method were introduced by 18-year Marble veteran Jay Roney. With this new technique, top players were saving time by performing lower launches and meeting the last elevator on the way up. In the first world record rampage prior to the challenge update, DK Man held the record at 18.225. This is important to note because the removal of the start pad with that update would give players a significant speed boost at the beginning of each level. But the start pad does not account for all of the time saved since then. The player C Murder, who has a knack for optimizing individual levels, found a way to use a falling edge hit to propel the marble into the goal, making sub 18 times a possibility. It works because in Marble It Up, jumping creates a force perpendicular to a surface. On flat ground you jump straight up, but on a slope, the force leans downhill. Because the marble is a perfect sphere, it's possible to treat an edge as a slope of any angle, corresponding to the marble's exact point of contact. In this case, the falling edge hit not only adds forward momentum, but also redirects the marble's downward speed out toward the goal. The current record stands at 17.229 by Spakai, the artist formerly known as SpaceKitten97, with this very clean time set on November 1st, 2020. This is just one of many records held by Spakai, who is widely considered the most dominant player in Marble It Up. In full game speedruns, the first player to successfully implement this skip was Marcin, although the game only had 4 chapters at launch when this occurred. Marcin's run was well ahead of its time, and the trick wouldn't be seen again until later versions of the game. Today, Elevator Action is considered to be an intermediate level shortcut by Marble It Up speedrunners. It can be seen in most full game speedruns under 50 minutes, but it will occasionally cause even the most experienced players to blunder. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have a trick requiring so much precision, it has never been attempted in full game, or even in chapter speedruns. Crystalline Matrix is ostensibly the long, slow, slippery ice level with no momentum at all, with nothing but time travels to use for a faster final time. A time travel is an item that manipulates the in-game timer, slowing it down to 10% speed for up to 5 seconds. The day after the game's release, a tricky little shortcut using this crystal was performed by KnockS, a Marble Blast player known for tool-assisted speedruns. It requires a fair amount of speed and topspin, and it manages to avoid the longest section without time travels. But this was still a roundabout route, and it may have even been considered by the level's designer. It took quite a while, but this route would eventually be introduced to full game by Spekai in his 3513, set in February 2020. Players still use this technique in these RTA speedruns today, especially in runs under 40 minutes, and it still makes me want to flip the table. However, the number 9 spot belongs to a far more difficult shortcut from the first area going directly to the goal. First theorized by myself in a tool-assisted speedrun, more on that later, the marvel was required to perform 3 successive edge hits within a tenth of a second, all at very specific angles. Finding a setup for humans to pull this off would be next to impossible. Now, a single edge hit takes a fair amount of skill to perform correctly. Adding a second one increases the difficulty many times over, because the first edge hit has to be so precise that it sets up the second one at the perfect angle. With a triple edge hit, the challenge increases exponentially. Yet again, DK Man swept in on the very same day, October 17th, 2018. Foregoing the starting time travel, but setting up the same triple edge hit from a much easier position. Well, relatively. By day's end, DK had brought the record down to a 7.76, which, despite being nearly 4 seconds slower than the task route, still managed to be 4 seconds faster than anyone else at the time. Even with the easier setup, this shortcut was still notoriously difficult, and it would take over 3 weeks before any other player would manage to land it. But it still wasn't fast enough. Eventually, the run was beaten using an older version of the original shortcut. Unlike DK, C-Murder picked up several time travels, keeping a slow clock running all the way around to the goal. The only way the shortcut would ever be seen again in a world record run was to collect the time travel at the start. But it didn't happen. The route was just too difficult, and when the time came for the world record rampage, the record was held by Spekai with a 6.166 using the older shortcut. By this time, Task Crystalline Matrix had become the most notorious route in the entire game. It was the standard by which all other difficult tricks would be compared. Other tool-assisted routes were humanly impossible, but this one was just undeniably possible. Nothing about it was inhuman, but the insane precision made it seem like you would have a better chance of winning the lottery. Things would change, however, with the advent of the challenge update. On June 16th, 2019, this tool-assisted speedrun would be uploaded by the Mop from Mars, one of the most successful speedrunners on the Nintendo Switch version of the game. As it turned out, the updated speed boost from the start, combined with a new jump pattern, made an entirely new approach to the shortcut possible. By using the gap to the right, the player would not only end up closer to the goal, but also in line with the upper time travel. Once again, Same Day DK managed to find a faster variation and uploaded this proof of concept within a few hours. A double edge hit. Even with a difficult setup, at last a path had been found which could be realistically landed by individual level runners. And sure enough, the very next day, DK would use this route to set a 5.48, followed by a 4.44, banishing the old shortcut to RTA runs forever. It still might take hundreds or thousands of restarts to get a single finish, but the shortcut was finally achievable. Today, the record is held by Snowboarder, who is best known for his weekly challenge world record sweeps. The final time is a blistering 3.432 seconds, making it the 4th fastest level in the entire game, behind only Up the Wall, Super Jump, and... wait, Vertigo? Okay, that's pretty crazy. Sometimes the simplest tricks are found right away, but other times they can be hidden in plain sight for months, or even years. The Pit of Despair was always known to be hiding countless potential skips and shortcuts. The potential was evident, and players spent many hours searching through the level with a fine-tooth comb. By the time of the World Record Rampage, the Pit of Despair's record was a crazy combination of basher hits and edge hits, culminating in this 26.893 by C murder. Even after the challenge update, very little would be improved for over a full year. Task routes by that time were beyond impossible to replicate, and only Spekai would be crazy enough to challenge C murder on his own route. It wasn't until February 7th, 2020, when Keeper would announce a new world record had been set on the Pit of Despair, 17.33. Without any warning, the Mercurial legend Woody landed this curious shortcut, saving over 9 seconds, complete with off-screen video footage. The trick looked so easy. Like, how had nobody managed to do this before? Surely a group of speedrunners with 16 months and thousands of hours of experience could quickly turn this into a frame war. In reality, that couldn't be further from the truth. Top players were struggling to recreate it even with tool assistance, and several of the required movements were not fully understood. Over time, this Pit of Despair skip came to be known simply as Pit Skip, because in trying to escape the pit, you would only fall deeper into despair. In order to reach the top edge of the basher, players would need to perform a rising edge hit on a sideways angle, using an advanced technique known as analog turning to build enough speed into the jump. The basher's hitbox is much sharper than its model appears, meaning an exact amount of height is required without overshooting it. Finally, the timing was critical, as only a fast start with a clean edge hit and smooth turns would even reach the basher in question with time to make the cycle. This wasn't like Crystalline Matrix, where a player could casually throw out 100 attempts in just a few minutes. This trick was demanding. Ultimately, it took 7 whole months for Woody's run to be improved, when Spekai found a way to pull off the shortcut and combine it with a basher hit and super jump to the finish. Spekai would later describe this shortcut as the hardest skip in the entire game, but not before this happened in the Super Bowl full game race of 2021.
So, Space Kitty, are you landing POD skip right now?
I just got it, baby. Yes.
Oh my god, really?
Yeah, I did.
What the?
Wow.
Dude!
Yeah, I got it.
This is world record.
It's over.
And this is the real reason why Pit Skip takes this spot on our list. More than just a single fluke among 1,000 brute force attempts, this technique is viable enough in the hands of a master to be landed in a full game run. And as the cherry on top, the risk of failure is lessened because the player will usually survive a missed attempt with no time lost in the process. Katz's, the king of Chapter 5, has already made use of this shortcut to decimate the Chapter 5 RTA leaderboards, calling it, quote, the most difficult thing I've pulled off in my life so far. He currently holds a 42-second lead, which will continue to be untouchable until someone else can finish out a near perfect run with an insane Pit of Despair. I can't wait to see this shortcut in a full game world record as well. Oh, and as for the IL world record, this is how it looks today, with Snowboarder's gorgeous run soaring into the goal with a time of 16.407. One question I often hear is, how do speedrunners find these routes? And often it is a result of collaboration, as players and pathfinders work together to build on each other's ideas. By design, Marble It Up encourages this by allowing anyone to view and race replays from the top 5 leaderboards. The story of Contraption shows what a few players working together can accomplish to bring a level to its knees. A week after the game's release, as of October 6th, the pioneer Cobalt had established a route for his favorite level Contraption. It started long and slow, grabbing every time travel he could before climbing to the second level and racing back across the obstacles. Collecting 6 time travels meant that during the 30 seconds of real time before they expired, only 3 seconds passed on the in-game clock. He finished with a time of 11.05 seconds. As a Pathfinder at heart, I was hoping to find something shorter, and after a few hours of searching, I came across this potential shortcut. Jumping back inside the starting room after collecting 5 time travels, it was possible to jump up to the second level with a tricky rising edge hit and bounce back directly into the goal. Surprise, surprise, DK Man landed it on the same day, October 7th, 2018, getting a 6.88, which he improved to a 6.33. This was expected, as it was one of the more realistic skips to be discovered. Still, there were a number of improvements yet to be found. On October 14th, Cobalt found a way to reach the upper level more quickly and easily by doing a double jump, first on the flat ground and then from the start pad itself. He even managed to score a 5.44, beating my task by getting a faster TT catch. A single time travel saves up to 4.5 seconds from the in-game timer. The only way it saves less than that is when the player reaches the goal before normal time restarts. In that situation, the sooner a time travel is collected, the more time it saves, so getting a fast TT catch becomes a priority. Later that day, C-Murder stumbled across another improvement. While attempting to finish the level with a slower wall hit instead of the start pad, he took the inside path before the opening and still managed to build speed. Right away, I incorporated this into the route and challenged Cobalt to land it. Cobalt's response was unbelievable. He didn't just finish the run, he did it with a TT catch at 3.30 seconds by squeezing through this gap in the perimeter wall. The final time was a 5.04. The moment I laid eyes on Cobalt's run, I knew I had missed something big. I went straight into the game to find out just how much more Contraption had to offer. And what I found was shocking. Emulating Cobalt's start, this tool-assisted route grabbed just 2 time travels and rolled back under the garden wall and into the keep. And with Frankenstein's monster of a finish, Contraption would never be the same again. Previous route improvements had been small iterations, but this cranked up the difficulty 100-fold. Building speed against a moving platform was hard enough, but to then thread the needle and get inside without losing it, only to fail the finish, was discouraging. This route caught the eye of Woody, who, together with Cobalt, would grind attempts to land the route. The 2 runners shared strats while competing with each other to be the very first, and after 2 whole months, on December 27th, Cobalt secured it with a 4.17. Following Cobalt's path, Spekai barely took it with a 4.156 the next day, saying, "This is one of those world records that will last less than 3 nanoseconds. I'm pretty sure about that. LOL." He was very, very wrong. 5 months later, in May 2019, Spekai's run was featured in the World Record Rampage, which was an omen of the challenge update to come. Among Contraption's many perils, there had been one saving grace. The start pad provided the fastest and easiest way to reach the goal. But now with start pads removed from the game, players had no idea if this route could even be completed. The changes were no small controversy, and eventually Cobalt would step away from the game for some time. Woody continued, trying his best to land the Franken finish, but without any success. By July of 2019, players were calling for Contraption's leaderboards to be wiped. As of August 4th, it was the oldest record in the game, and one of just 3 remaining records from before the challenge update. Finally, on August 24th, Woody prevailed, with a time of 3.962. How? The update's starting speed boost gave him a much faster TT catch, without the more difficult start, and he managed to land a wall hit for the finish, once theorized by C-Murder. The current record is a 3.856 by Hatchet, set by taking a leap of faith over the void for a mid-air TT catch on August 30th, 2021. This run uses nearly the full 9 seconds of time save, hitting the goal just 4 frames before normal time restarts. Of course, full game runs are measured in real time, meaning time travels have no effect on the final result. This allows for a simpler route to be followed, but that doesn't make it an easy one. In June of 2020, C-Murder also developed a way to wall hit to the goal by leaving and re-entering the center through the same opening. This was adopted by top runners in time for Super Bowl 2021, including Katz's, Hatchet, and Spakai. With the challenge update in May 2019, the game also introduced Chapter 6, to complete what we now call Marble It Up Classic. It featured the biggest and best levels of any chapter. The very first new level was Danger Zone, a technical challenge that would be the sharpest difficulty spike in the game. In the second half of the level, players have to super speed around this half loop, collect a gem, and follow a gravity surface to the final stretch. As the name implies, a gravity surface changes the direction of gravity wherever the marble makes contact. This meant players were fighting an uphill battle, culminating at the final slope with this spinner chasing behind. For casual players, it can be a huge undertaking, and for speedrunners, a single mistake could be very costly. Within a single day of the level's release, DK-Man uploaded the first recorded world record using a loop exit to collect the gem and bounce over the gravity platform, avoiding it entirely. With the final stretch no longer uphill, he could use the rocks and bumpers to bounce all the way to the final loop. This skip had the potential to save up to 20 seconds. Combined with a few smaller shortcuts early on, DK took the record under 40 seconds on June 1st, 2019. For a level that had only been out for 3 days, this run was phenomenal. But the loop exit launch was higher than it needed to be, and the finish was still fairly slow. So DK set out to develop a new ending, using a spinner on the final section to aim directly for the goal. And while live streaming attempts on June 11, 2019, he landed this run.
Be good. That's it. Oh my gosh, holy crap. Oh my gosh.
35.24. A huge world record. The time stood for over a month without any challengers. Only Spakai, the Lord of Marble It Up, would dare to improve it. By reaching the final stretch a full second sooner, Spakai could use an earlier spinner cycle to glide into the goal with the smoothest ending this level has ever seen. Since then, improvements to the record have been focused on the earlier sections of the level, where a series of improvements by Katz's shaved off enough time to nearly achieve sub 30, even with a slower finish. The record is currently held by Spakai with a 30.408 on June 18th, 2021, using a bumper hit for the ending. Despite being a slower strategy overall, it has the advantage of not being dependent on the timing of spinner cycles. Will the record ever be retaken using the ultra smooth ending of yesteryear? Perhaps. It is only a matter of time. Meanwhile, the real-time speedruns of full game would also need a viable way to skip the gravity platform. Most IL endings were too inconsistent, and the final section was both slow and unforgiving. DK-Man was the first to incorporate a loop exit into his runs in his first full game world record on June 25th, 2019. The skip saved a decent amount of time, but more importantly, it made the final section much easier to complete. In my own attempts, I found the loop exit strategy to be still too inconsistent at my skill level, and I was dying often while trying to rush the final areas. On August 16th, 2019, I decided to develop a new method for skipping the gravity surface, only to find that I had discovered something much better. By holding on to the super speed all the way to the gem, runners would be able to perform a small bounce and zoom under the rock to the side of a bumper, launching all the way to the goal. Not only was this method faster than the loop exit, it was easier than finishing the level normally, and being placed right on a checkpoint meant any missed attempt would cost a fraction of the time as before. Nowadays, this finish is used by a majority of RTA runners, saving about 18 seconds, and it is one of the first shortcuts recommended to be learned by newcomers to the community. It's fun, it's fast, it's satisfying, and that's why it's one of my favorite shortcuts of all time. Oh, and just because I can't resist, here is the tool-assisted speedrun route, which uses a combination of the loop exit while saving the super speed and a bumper hit zooming to the finish. We're halfway through the top 10, so let's take a moment to look at some honorable mentions. Archipelago is the first major shortcut discovered by most casual players, prompting many an aspiring speedrunner to search out other hidden routes as they play through the game. Thread the Needle features this neat super speed edge hit discovered by Marcin for individual levels, and this crazy loop exit I found for RTA, but which has only ever been used by Spakai in Chapter 2 speedruns. Off Kilter Skip is a classic, very stylish run, which is achievable for anyone with enough dedication, and doing it consistently is the mark of a top-level speedrunner. Acrophobia features a series of highly technical small skips, which combine to form a mind-blowing route. But it does not have a single massive shortcut to save tons of time, so it's not really a fit for this list. Vertigo is the same story, and as I alluded to before, it currently ranks number 3 for the fastest world record times. Just look at the skill involved. When we allow for tool assistance, Vertigo is theoretically the shortest level in the entire game. Tangle does have a big skip. Many, in fact. The goal of most of them is to collect both gems and finish without changing gravity. It's a major run killer at the end of full game, and it makes for some tense and exciting moments. Finally, Retrograde Rally features this high-octane skip, with both IL and RTA variations. There's also one skip to the finish found by Kriz, which is insanely flashy, and was landed for the first time after this video was already written. You've probably noticed by now that I have had a hand in most of these skips in one way or another. And I suppose that shouldn't be surprising. This is, after all, my list of my favorite shortcuts, and naturally, it's going to include the routes that I have a special connection to. I want to acknowledge my biases, but I don't want to avoid them because that's part of what makes it my video. I made a name for myself and Marble It Up by making tool-assisted speedruns, TAS for short, and the very first video I published was of River Vantage. If you don't already know, a TAS is basically an artificial speedrun, created using tools like save states, and usually made using an emulator. In Marble It Up, we use a feature built directly into the game called Practice Mode, which allows the player to rewind to any point in a level, effectively turning every frame into its own save state. Rewind is a powerful tool, and it has rapidly accelerated the progression of the game thanks to its accessibility. It's part of the reason why an indie game with such a small community has such high-level gameplay after only 3 years. Before the River Vantage TAS, there were already some crazy developments in the level, with the first shortcut being discovered on day 1 by, you guessed it, DK Man. But the oldest recorded video was by Radiant Vibe, who was the first to get under 14 seconds on October 1st, 2018. The edge hit required to get all the way up is not only frame perfect, it also needs the right combination of speed, built by jumping, and spin, built by rolling. It was a huge time save compared to climbing up the level in the intended way. Around this time, I was experimenting with Rewind, and discovered this skip using a double edge hit into a third edge hit to barely reach the top of the level. At first glance, it doesn't even look possible, with no straight edges to take advantage of. But by approaching on an angle from the right, the marble can use the inside of the curve to redirect up high on a straight path. This was October 4th, 2018. The game had only been out for 5 days, and we were already breaking the game in completely unforeseen places, using a simple practice tool in unintended ways. This was a trick I could only land using thousands of rewinds, smashing the marble into the curve until something magical happened. Later that month, DK posted his own TAS of the route, going under 11 seconds with a faster time travel catch. At the time, I was convinced it would never be landed by a human. And indeed, despite the best efforts of the speedrunning community, the only improvements to the world record were using the same day 1 route. That is, until December 15th. Incredibly, DK had done it. This ridiculous skip, which may not have been found for years without tool assistance, had been landed by a human in only 77 days. And somehow, that human had beaten his own task time in the process. Not to be outdone, I released task number 2 with a time under 10 seconds in order to maintain tool-assisted supremacy. The key to a fast time travel catch is to use the super speed on the first frame, so the camera has to be turned 180 degrees before reaching the upper level. Although Grandmaster Spekai would also land the shortcut the following day, DK's run stood undefeated and was featured in the World Record Rampage 2 months later. The challenge update came, and world records were falling left and right. But much like on Contraption, there was a problem. The jump spacing for River Vantage was completely off now that the start pad had been removed, and it seemed like players would not be able to build enough speed to pull off the shortcut. 4 months after the update, nobody had come close, so I made one final task in hopes of discovering a practical method, and this was the result. Aside from the ending, everything in the run was possible for human players, and I'm pretty sure it could go sub 8 using task-only strats. But aside from proving it was possible, the new start wasn't much help. However, the next month on July 14th, 2019, Spekai was able to land the first shortcut run on the challenge update with a staggering 9.814. Spekai developed his own jump spacing, including a buffer jump to clear one of the ledges completely. A buffer jump is what we call a simple technique to jump higher. It works by exploiting a built-in grace period, allowing your marble to jump a few frames after it has bounced or rolled off the ground. By bouncing and then jumping on the next 2 frames, you can combine the height of the bounce and the jump at the cost of a little speed. The crazy thing is, Spekai didn't even make a video of this run. I am recording it myself, more than 2 years later, because it still stands in the top 5 today. And for that matter, so does DK's run from before the challenge update, which might make it the oldest top 5 on the leaderboards. The sheer age of these runs stands as a testament to how incredibly difficult the shortcut is. As you can see, the record is currently held by Snowboarder, with a 9.246 set on June 23, 2020. Although it could go down below 9 seconds soon, as a new player, TwinX, has come very close recently. As for the original edge hit, it has made a resurgence in full game runs. While unlikely to succeed, it is still fairly safe to go for it while setting up for another RTA skip, discovered by C-Murder in February 2021. Even if they miss, the player can turn around and perform this much more consistent shortcut, saving a whole lot of time. But maybe, just maybe, if everything lines up perfectly, lightning will strike on River Vantage.
You know, just having a good
Whoa,
time, having
hold on.
fun.
Let's take a moment. What was that? Now, if we were only looking at skips in individual level speedruns, River Vantage would easily be a contender for the top of this list. But my real favorite shortcuts are the ones that have come to define the full game category. Full game speedruns are the greatest challenge the game has to offer, as all 60 levels need to be beaten back to back as quickly as possible. It takes remarkable knowledge, skill, and mental focus to complete so many tricks consistently, and the more challenging the routes a player chooses to attempt, the more demanding a speedrun will be overall. One of the flashiest shortcuts to be featured can be found on Cog Valley. Situated at the end of Chapter 3, Cog Valley features a long climb up these rotating cogs at the far end of the valley. However, this climb can be totally bypassed with a trick which has come to be known as coggers. On September 30th, 2018, the first Cog Valley skip was performed by Hoopy, with one giant edge hit on the center cog, saving 16 seconds over the next fastest time. It was a difficult technique, and it required a lot of topspin to work, but it turns out the basic concept had been at least theorized by developers. In fact, pre-release game footage showed a giant ramp on the center cog to facilitate this kind of shortcut. One unfortunate side effect of replays on the leaderboards is that most players didn't think to capture video of their records. But over the next few months, the route would be improved by SeaMurder. The new approach was shown in its first real-time attack speedrun by Eichwolf, who used it to beat all of Chapter 3 in 4 minutes 38 seconds on December 14, 2018. By keeping to the right, the player could edge hit against the tooth of the first cog, pointing much closer to the goal. In this case, Eichwolf got a particularly low trajectory for additional time saved. SeaMurder's own run was featured in the World Record Rampage with a 12.04, but that wouldn't be the last of his Cog Valley exploits. On June 21, 2019, after much grinding, SeaMurder broke the 4-minute barrier with his own Chapter 3 in 3 minutes 59 seconds. This was the first example of the coggers we see today, hitting the center of the first cog for an ideal trajectory. Of course, doing a difficult shortcut in a chapter speedrun is one thing, but landing it first try in the middle of a full game run adds a whole extra layer of pressure. On July 6, 2019, DK Man would be the first to do it, which helped him secure the first ever sub 40-minute time in Marble It Up Classic. Cog Valley quickly became one of the biggest highlights of the run. Anytime a speedrunner would perform it live, it would generate excitement at the possibility of a PB or a world record. The skip came to be known as Coggers, as Twitch viewers would spam its namesake emote in celebration. Despite the difficult inputs involved, Coggers just looked so cool that everyone wanted to do it. One of the great things about the shortcut is that it saves so much time, even landing it on the second try could still result in an overall benefit. Armed with this safety net, more and more players began practicing and learning the trick. Today, Coggers is a staple of the full game category, with top runners showing their prowess by consistently nailing the launch. It's still a huge relief to land it first try, but the skip can be found in most speedruns faster than 45 minutes. The individual record is held by Snowboarder, who landed this 11.068 on August 5th, 2021. While getting a launch as low as possible, the marble gets a boost from the very last cog in order to reach the finish. If the goal is to shave 20 seconds away from a Marble It Up speedrun, this might be the coolest looking shortcut with which to do it. Prior to the challenge update, the Pit of Despair was the final level in Marble It Up. With the addition of Chapter 6, the game would add a new finale, Stratosphere. Stratosphere is like a high-speed victory lap, letting players fly through space or loop-to-loop like a roller coaster as they celebrate a game well played. Though it does follow a very linear path without much opportunity to cut corners. A major feature of this level that was bound to be exploited are these rotating gravity platforms. In theory, they could be used to fall in any direction by setting the pull of gravity toward the destination. A route was first revealed on May 30th, 2019 by Israeli Red Dragon, a member of the game's development team and a pillar of marble speedrunning. By activating the platform's rotation, he gained access to the underside of the surface, allowing him to fall up directly toward the gem. In real time, this saves about 15 seconds, bypassing a third of this massive level. The next day, Hatchet used this route to beat the level in 1 minute 23 seconds. By June 2nd, he'd brought it down to a 119.47. In addition to the gravity shortcut, he also skipped the first loop at the beginning and the final loop at the end. Hatchet would continue to grind and optimize his time for several months as his signature world record. On the RTA front, DK Man first introduced Gravity Skip to full game in his quest for the first sub 40. The skip is actually quite consistent and not too difficult to learn. To make sure there were no mistakes, DK used 2 super speeds, one for the first 90-degree flip and one for the rest of the way. One of the great things about Stratosphere's Gravity Skip is there are variations for all different skill levels. New speedrunners can achieve the same effect by traveling all the way around the loop, turning around, and safely jumping to the gravity platform behind them. They could even keep a super speed in case they fail to make a smooth landing, making this a very approachable shortcut, and it can be found in most full game speedruns under 50 minutes. It's a great way to finish the run, and that's why it has become so iconic of the category. But just because a shortcut is RTA viable, doesn't mean there can't be crazy variations too. Shortly after Hatchet secured the first sub 119 on the individual level, I released my first Stratosphere task on August 11th, 2019. While otherwise the same as the Red Dragon route, this task dropped underneath the gravity platform to reach it from below with a very difficult edge hit. At that speed, a player would have to roll off the side with truly perfect timing to execute the skip. It was probably the hardest single edge hit in the game, but that still wasn't the crazy part. The real problem lies in those 3 little words that make every speedrunner shudder: reverse controls glitch. This effect occurs when the gravity is flipped 180 degrees all at once, and it causes all of the player's inputs to be inverted. Even worse, super speed power-ups malfunction, sending the player backwards instead of straight ahead. These were trivial for a task to overcome, but for a human, they could be insurmountable. Fortunately, the player Savadra developed a strategy to counteract this on the PC version while working on the All Trophies RTA category. First, he remapped his WASD keys to respond in reverse. Then he would play the first part of a level using a controller, switching back to keyboard and mouse once the reverse controls glitch took effect. On May 23, 2020, over 9 months after the route was published, Katz's was the first to land it, using Savadra's technique for movement after performing the edge hit. But he still needed to use backwards super speeds to skip the final loop, and he successfully did so with some snappy camera movement for a 115.708. Unwilling to concede, Hatchet went back to the lab, discovering a mysterious new way to bypass the reverse controls glitch by rolling off the platform above with a certain angle. It's not known why the glitch does not occur under these conditions, but it is fully reproducible. After many attempts, Hatchet took the record back with a 114.417 on June 11th, 2020. And that's where the record stands today. Of course, I wouldn't move on without showing the task only option, where the marble must cross the first gap without using a feather fall in order to use it later, flying up and behind the platform for a swift change in gravity. But that is a path we will likely never see in a world record run. I wasn't the first player to speedrun Real-Time Attack, but I was the first and only player for some time to run all 6 chapters as a full game after the challenge update. My early attempts were filled with mistakes, and my routes were very safe and simplistic. I certainly couldn't compete with top players, but despite my low skill, the goal was to inspire more players to pick up the game and the full game category. That is still my goal today with this very video. However, there was one challenging skip that I knew early on would be absolutely worth attempting, and that skip can be found on Escalation. Found in Chapter 6, Escalation is a long and winding staircase featuring these unique rising platforms for the marble to cross twice. Following the intended route, an excellent player could hope to complete it in about 90 seconds. When the level was first released, there was some interest in discovering whether the game could be beaten without jumping. For Escalation to be possible, certain areas would need to be bypassed completely. For example, in order to give enough height to reach the next platform, the player must both jump and use a super jump to combine their forces. Doing both on the same frame will compound the upward momentum for maximum height. My idea to avoid the jumping requirement was to exploit the rising platform, landing on the outer edge with a super jump for the same compounding effect. But the result was much more significant than what was expected. Just like that, a shortcut had been found to skip half of Escalation. I immediately set out to make a tool-assisted speedrun, but we'll get back to that. The first player to perform the shortcut was Death Pony, who also coined the name of this high-flying technique, the kickflip. On May 29th, 2019, Death Pony finished the level in under 45 seconds to dominate the leaderboards. It's not money in the bank, kickflipping ain't easy. There's nothing else like it in the game, and it takes tons of practice to get used to the timing and control. Still, I knew it would be worth it in my full game attempts because it saves so much time. Even with multiple deaths from failed attempts, it could still save time. And by activating the checkpoint after collecting a super jump, the time lost from failures was greatly reduced. Eventually, my kickflip worked, and I used it to help set the first sub-hour full game run on June 10th, 2019. But there was more than one place on Escalation where kickflips could be used. The first and hardest kickflip is at the very start, reaching the super jump needed for the kickflip number 2. A final kickflip serves as a fast and stylish way to reach the goal. The first to combine all 3 kickflips was Cobalt with a 35.22 on May 31st, 2019. But this video is a special one, showing all 3 kickflips being used in a full game speedrun. DK Man's sub 40-minute run was a landmark achievement, setting the bar for excellence far higher than I could on July 6th of 2019, and it went a long way toward legitimizing Marble It Up as a speed game. Since then, just 11 other players have passed that barrier, and although it took me over a year and a half to catch up, I celebrated my own sub 40 in February of 2021. But let's go back to May 2019, when the kickflip was first discovered. Naturally, the question had to be answered: how high could it go? The answer came in the form of this tool-assisted speedrun. Only by landing on the edge of a knife, at the fastest point of the platform's rotation, and with a frame-perfect super jump, could the marble reach the blue elevator far above. On its own, this one kickflip represents the single biggest shortcut in the entire game, saving over 56 seconds. This was no easy feat, and there was no margin for error. But just 2 days after the task was unveiled, Cobalt made the first elevator kickflip for a time of 27.96, which he brought down all the way to a 22.31 the same day, May 31st. Boy, that escalated quickly. This run was astounding for its time, and managed to beat the task by a couple of seconds thanks to a lower first kickflip. The times were going down and down, with the record getting closer and closer to perfection. Naturally, this elevator kickflip is considered too risky for RTA, with the lower variation being used as a much safer option. Except, there is one person. This is Umbra Sunset. Umbra is synonymous with Escalation. Easily the most dedicated player this game has ever seen, Umbra famously spent over 2,000 hours grinding Escalation in the pursuit of absolute perfection. His first world record came in the form of a 21.77 on October 1st, 2019. He spent the next entire year going toe-to-toe with heavyweights like Katz's and Spekai, trading blows while taking the record lower and lower and lower. Umbra's RTA playstyle is high risk, high reward. So as the world's most experienced kickflipper, he has been known on occasion to throw down an elevator kickflip in the middle of a full game run, or even a race. Even with his vast amount of experience, it's still a 50-50, which highlights the ridiculous mastery that would be required to do it consistently. In his own sub 40 debut, Umbra clutched the shortcut on his first try, clawing his way back from a deficit to barely secure his full game PB. The world record for Escalation is currently held by Spekai, whose 19.955 broke the 20-second barrier on October 19th, 2020, along with Umbra's heart. Altogether, this run saves 82 seconds compared to a skipless speedrun of the level, making it the most heavily shortcut level in Marble It Up. The progression of Marble It Up speedruns has been swift and relentless. Skips have been found, records have been broken, and the bar has been raised higher and higher and higher. When the 40-minute barrier was first conquered, I truly believed we were approaching the limit of what a full-game speedrunner could do. This record stood for 209 days, until it was finally beaten on January 31st, 2020. That record stood for less than a day. The next record also stood for less than a day. Over and over, the times were dropping until, only 19 days after the fall of DK, something happened that would go down in the legend of Marble It Up speedrunning. The all-father of marbles, the speedrunning prodigy Spekai, delivered the first ever deathless speedrun of Marble It Up in 34 minutes and 42 seconds. The routes were perilous, the skips were plentiful, mortal eyes were amazed, and although it was not without flaws, this run was heralded as the coming of a new era of deathless Marble It Up full game world records. However, from the shadows, one player refused to bow down before Spekai's mighty hand. Katz's Unconquered fought back with his own secret weapon from the heart of Chapter 5. The history of Staying Alive is in many ways the history of Marble It Up. It shows how far beyond the limitations of the game its players are willing to go, and just how far those players have come from their humble beginnings in 2018. At its core, Staying Alive is an auto-scroller, where a single moving platform travels from beginning to end as players try to dodge various obstacles and collect time travels in order to beat the clock. The first notable world record was a 37.36, set by Cobalt on launch day, September 29th, as he abandoned the moving platform for a hop, a skip, and a jump to the finish. As a tool-assisted speedrunner, I knew in my heart there had to be a faster way. I had to leave the moving platform behind as soon as I possibly could. On October 6th, I published this task. Everything in this video was insane. It wasn't like any task we had seen before. It was, for me, the first glimpse into the true power of Rewind. Needless to say, this route was truly impossible for a human to perform. On the decorative curve alone, the marble built speed using 9 consecutive edge hits, with each one increasing the difficulty exponentially. This task-only technique came to be known as edge surfing, and it serves as a key to many tool-assisted speedrun routes. The history of tasks could easily be its own video, but these task-only techniques were not a requirement to skip large sections of Staying Alive. On November 28, 2018, long before his kick-flipping shenanigans, Death Pony showed the world what he could do with this impressive run. Casually landing on beams and pillars as if they were always meant to be used, Death Pony breezed into the goal with a cool 28.62. Cobalt's improvement the next day was a result of building much more speed on the curve, and a more favorable edge hit angle from the metal beam. Building more speed made the marble much more difficult to control, but it paid off in the final stretch. In the world record rampage, Cobalt's 22.369 was a nearly perfect run. Accelerating all the way through the turn, Cobalt was running up against the limit of how fast it was possible to go without losing traction. But the limitations of a speed game always seem impossible to overcome, until one day a discovery breaks through and changes the game. In the months following the game's release, occasional users would join the official Discord, claiming diagonal movement or the game's camera angle affected the speed of the marble's acceleration. These claims were met with great skepticism, as the game had been specifically designed to be just as fast while going forward, unlike Marble Blast, which gave an advantage while traveling at 45 degrees. However, over time, Woody would come to develop a method for turning, where he would hold his control stick partially to the right, while turning his camera to steer around a curve. What Woody had discovered, and testers confirmed, was that with a 70-degree angle, the marble would maintain an unusually high level of traction while on the ground. This technique has come to be known as analog turning, and although there are many nuances, what's important to know is that it is impossible to do with a normal keyboard and mouse. The advantage for controllers was very subtle on a majority of levels, where speedrunners generally prefer to stay in the air, which might explain its late discovery. But there was a potential benefit to be found on Staying Alive. On June 29, 2019, Spekai used an analog controller to build high speed through the narrow curve, flying much faster into the goal in just 20.59 seconds. Unable to part with his keyboard, Cobalt sought after one last improvement to the route in order to defeat Spekai's overwhelming turn speed. Despite his best efforts, it wasn't meant to be. But it also wasn't in vain. On February 17, 2020, Katz's entered the scene and claimed the world record using a complex maneuver Cobalt had invented. It required a leap of faith, 2 wall hits, and an edge hit to boot, in order to leave the platform behind sooner than ever before. A run like this took a long time to pull off. Obviously, there was no holding back to adjust for a perfect ending, it just had to work. And for that, Katz's needed the perfect amount of speed coming out of the curve. Over the course of many attempts, he started to get really good at it. It was at this time in history when Spekai's deathless speedrun shook the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But this was Spekai's staying alive. Katz's knew that Stay and Skip could cut 50 whole seconds from the full game world record. He had already done it in his Chapter 5 speedruns. But this was harder than any other RTA technique. There were no checkpoints, and a single failed attempt would mean a complete reset 18 minutes into the run. On June 17, 2020, Katz's took the throne with a full game world record in 33 minutes and 46 seconds, a 56-second improvement thanks to Staying Alive. Tragically, the new record suffered just a single death on Dire Straits. From that day forward, Stay and Skip became an absolute requirement for anyone hoping to contest the full game world record. In one giant leap of progression, the category was transformed. Nobody could match Katz's consistency, and they would still need to survive the gauntlet that is Chapter 6 if they somehow stayed alive while staying alive. It took a truly Herculean effort from Hercules himself, but after losing run after run to this merciless shortcut, Spekai finally retook the record on February 9th, 2021, nearly 8 months later. He finished with an incredible time of 33:02, 80 seconds faster than his old PB, and it still wasn't deathless. To this day, the deathless full game has never been repeated, but I dream of the day when a near-perfect run will be set with contemporary routes and strategies. So far, Hatchet has come the closest. On September 21st, 2019, after this entire video was written and recorded, he set the new all-time record for Full Game Classic in 32 minutes and 26 seconds. This run features some variation of every shortcut on this list, and more, with Hatchet even landing pit skip for his first time ever in RTA. It looks like I didn't have to wait that long after all. There can be no doubt, the 32-minute barrier will fall someday, maybe even someday soon. Hatchet's run still has a handful of time losses, and he's not done yet with the category. Combining all 6 chapter world records gives a total of 30:43, making sub 31 times just barely within the realm of imagination. But the march of progression is unstoppable, and the game is still in its early years. If there is a lower limit to what speedrunners can accomplish, it might be well beyond what we would dare to imagine today. Allow me to leave you with 2 final videos showing the cutting edge of Staying Alive. The first is the current individual world record by Spekai on May 31st, 2021, with a time of 17.282. And last but not least, this is the tool-assisted speedrun, where the mere suggestion of riding a platform is met with absolute ridicule. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. This is my first time making a scripted video, so any feedback you might have would be really appreciated. Did the format work as a mashup between a world record history video and a top 10 list? Did I talk about myself too much? Is this your first time even hearing about Marble It Up? Please let me know down in the comments. If you are interested in playing Marble It Up, you should know about Marble It Up Mayhem. Marble It Up Classic is the game we've been playing for the last 3 years, but Marble It Up Mayhem is an upcoming update with 117 levels and some really fun and competitive multiplayer modes. It's coming as a free update to the Switch and Steam versions. It's available as a beta now on Steam, or you can play it on Apple Arcade, and will also be the version coming to Xbox and PlayStation platforms. I don't have any stake in the game, but I do have a vested interest in the community, so I'd love to see new players come in and join our group of friends. I'd like to say also a special thanks to Katz's and Space Taco for their suggestions on the script. This is a good time to mention that you can watch Hatchet's speedrun. I'll link it here, and also if you're interested in tool-assisted speedruns, you can also check out my task playlist, where I have a lot of really, really cool videos in there. So again, thank you so much for watching. It's been a lot of fun, and I hope that I get to see you in the Marble It Up Discord, discord.gg/marbleitup, and I'll see you there.